Ugh. What's on the agenda today, I wonder? What the hell? Huh. Well, that's not ominous at all. My friend is missing. When he disappeared, he'd been working on a magazine about the paranormal. His first real job as an editor. With almost no budget, he'd resorted to digging through back issues and unused research material, looking for inspiration. As he did, terrifying truth began to emerge about a certain place in the Kinki region. I've collected the relevant articles, interviews, and other materials in this book, and once you have understood everything, I would like to ask for your cooperation. I hope you will get in touch. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to A Skeleton's Library. Today, I'm going to go over my non spoiler thoughts on About a Place in the Kinki Region by Sesuji, a mixed media horror story. I believe its exact classification would be something like a pseudo fictional epistolary story. Essentially, it's a found footage book, acting as if it takes place in reality. It is also told through a variety of forms, from articles to internet forums. I honestly just stumbled across this book by seeing people talk about it online. I looked it up and saw how it was seemingly a debut book. It came out in 2023 and had a movie adaptation like the next year, and now its English translation just officially got published on January 20th, 2026. So with it piquing my interest in it being new, quote unquote new, I figured that was a good excuse to give it a read and review it. Since the English translation is new, I'll just stick to my non-spoiler thoughts. If you want a quick should I get it or not answer, I recommend it if you enjoy horror in general, more specifically found footage stuff or the Ring books. With that out of the way, I'll hop into my more specific thoughts on the book. I think it has a very powerful opening by starting with source materials from several stories you will read throughout the book. Seeing them without the proper context makes them even creepier and really sets an eerie tone for the book. It also adds to the facade that this book is something set in reality, which I think it maintains very well throughout. It does not really slip at all and maintains that focus. I find that very admirable, especially for what appears to be a debut novel. This story clearly loves found footage horror. The way they use the different forms of media also keeps it really fresh, and I think they did a good job keeping them basic and juggling them. This book does not try to bite off more than it can chew, which is mostly a blessing for it. In between sections of the mixed media format, Sesuji interweaves the other narrative portion in this book, the story of them and their friend Ozawa, and how they started to discover the connections between all these paranormal stories in the Kinki region. These are Sesuji recalling the events, each section usually involving them going over or mentioning the stories and material we have read in the chapters leading up to them. Sesuji merely sets up a likable character in Ozawa, and their dynamic is simple and easy to root for. These parts also really make you feel as if you're discovering the mystery alongside them, for the most part. I really enjoyed this, as it does make the book feel like more of a journey. It makes me recall how I felt reading House of Leaves. Of course, that book is doing a whole lot more with everything. So I do feel like if you enjoy a book like About a Place in the Kinki region, you'll probably enjoy House of Leaves. The most enjoyment I had in the book was probably 25 to 75% through it, when you can really start putting things together and making theories for the possible causes or what the perpetrators are. I found it fun hearing about a recurring phrase or some fruit in the stories and trying to think of what Japanese mythology I know that involves these things and trying to discern what exactly was happening. I already mentioned the Ring influences, but I also kept thinking of Silent Hill F as I read this book. So obviously the original translation of this book came out in 2023. No particular influence there. Once again, I can just see the enjoyers of one easily enjoying the other as well. With how the book is structured, it's essentially like an anthology. You're getting a wide variety of stories that all have some common threads. This makes it run into the same pitfalls that most anthologies run into. Some stories just stand far above some of the others. Some of the stories, especially ones at the start of the book, feel pretty lackluster. They feel more like creative exercises rather than fully realized concepts. Others feel like they are getting to something interesting, but stop just short. but not in a way that makes them feel more mysterious, but in a way that makes them feel unrealized. Sesuji does hit their stride though, and a lot of them start to get really effective at being creepy and building tension around the mystery of the Kinki region. The book effectively builds that tension most good horror does, where you become subconsciously tensed up. You feel fine, but are sucked into the story, and when a noise happens, instead of just waving it away per usual, it makes you feel that tiny sense of paranoia and unease. You look into the darkness a bit more for a while, some part of you expecting something to lurk there now. The tension makes you double check doors and look outside for anything, just to calm your soul a bit. I say all this, but I also read most of this book at night, and in an old creaky house, so it probably helped elevate that mood a good bit. To go back to how Sesuji mostly does not bite off more than they can chew, I think one of the downsides of that is they barely experiment with the format, which I think is a shame, as when they have hints of it, it elevates the book. For example, there's an article in this book that we later see the rough draft for, so we get to see how and why the original was changed. It's a clever way of using the same general story to reveal more about the overarching mystery. It is one of the best examples of giving out a bit more information in the book. So I wish Sesuji actually played with the format like that more. Have more rough drafts, editor's notes, and the like. If you're using a somewhat non-traditional format anyway, play around more with it. Another thing that Sesuji does well is how they use modern technology in the story, rather than just stick to more standard things like letters and articles. It really makes you feel the passage of time and just how long of a time span is between all these different stories. I found their use of forms particularly effective, though especially early on. It can feel a bit silly, especially with one story essentially involving a spirit type entity commenting on a porn site. My biggest issue with About a Place in the Kinki region is pretty easily its ending. One of the last stories essentially fills in almost every single blank piece of the mystery, then followed up by Sesuji doing the rest in their final chapter. Like a lot of horror, this really removes a lot of the air out of its sails, especially when all the last bits are essentially hand-fed to you at the end. This book was at its best in the middle, when you had pieces of the mystery but it was largely still blank, allowing you to speculate and marinate in that horror of not knowing. It also does not help that it feels like most of it is revealed particularly for a reveal and twist at the end. It fails to feel natural or satisfying. It also leaves a bit up in the air, with some implications at the end, but even then that's mostly spelled out in the novel. I feel most readers can put it together pretty easily. This book really feels like Sesuji thought of the ending first, and then they wrote the story around that ending and idea. Obviously, Sesuji is most likely not the author's actual name, and I do not know if they will release more books under that name, since they are part of the actual story narrative of About a Place in the Kinki region. I do hope I see more of them though, and get to see if and how they evolve in their storytelling. Overall, About a Place in the Kinki region is a pretty easy recommendation. It's not tackling anything particularly new, but it's not trying to be anything new or experimental. It's just a good read for people who are fans of horror, particularly found footage horror and things like the Ring books. It wears its inspirations on its sleeve. It is a fun little journey though. I do not know how rereadable it is. I do not think it is something I would find or get more out of on rereads. It's just a nice simple journey you take once, maybe recall here and there, but you never really feel the need to take again. At least that's how I think I feel right now. I'll have to see in the future if I ever get that urge to reread it. If you read the book, let me know your thoughts below, and I will see you next time.